On today's video, we're going to be talking about 10 skills that you need to acquire in order to improve your knitting and get it to the level that you really want your knitting to be. So I've got 10 points and let's get started. The first one is you need to have the ability to modify patterns. So patterns are generally written for a standard size because when you're creating, you have to follow some general guidelines in terms of the length of your sleeves, the length of the garment, the bust sizes, but the truth is our bodies do not meet standard sizes. So as the patterns are designed for standard sizes, we still need to modify. For example, I've got really long arms and I didn't know this until I started knitting my own garments. So when I'm knitting a sweater or anything, particularly if it's not my pattern, I have to adjust the length of the sleeves so that they can fit properly. And there was one time when I was writing a pattern and I used the grading based on my own sleeve length, and the testers that were working on it were like, hey, my sleeves are already super long before I can even finish the decreases. So even though we grade using standard sizes, when you're knitting, you need to be fully aware of your own measurements and modify the pattern to your measurements. That way you'll get the fit that you want. So that's the first point. The second one is, okay, I've got my notes here, so I'll be checking it. The second one, you have to learn to read charts and also work with written instructions. So different patterns are written in different ways. You might find something that you really love, but it's only charted. And if you don't know how to work with charts, that's going to be very difficult. For example, colorwork patterns are charted because there's no way you can say knit one in red, knit the next two in blue. So you basically use charts, and sometimes even with the raglan patterns that have got cables or lace or anything, it's much easier to express the pattern in charts than in written instructions, even though you'll find there'll be written instructions for those types of patterns. But the truth is it's easier to work on them just by looking at charts because you can literally see the pattern on the chart. But if you're working with color work, let's say it's an all over colorwork pull over, you'll discover that there won't even be much written instructions. Everything will be charted. So it's very important to be able to learn how to read charts, and even if you are more of a chart reader, also learn how to work with written instructions, because some patterns are mainly written instead of charted. So having both skills is very important. And then the third one is learn some pro finishes. So what separates a very basic garment and a professionally finished ones are a couple of subtle things that you can add to a pattern that will make it look really pretty. So what I'm going to do now is to include some close-ups of some photos of garments that I've knitted recently that have got some really interesting finishes. So you can do your pro finishes by adding some double knitting. I've noticed that the double knitted button band looks more polished and more professional than the ribbed one, even though there are times when a ribbed edging is much more proper for a pattern than the double knitted one. It's not a be all and end all of edgings for cardigans, for example, but I've noticed that those patterns that have got a double knitted band look much neater and more professionally finished. They take longer, but I really love the look. And the other thing that I've been doing lately on my patterns is to add some crochet edging. I did it on this top here, but I'll do some close-ups as well. So it covers the pickup line, and in that way it looks more neat and more even and well finished. So I've been loving this. Even with folded necklines, I've been doing that as well around the neck, and it really gives it a very beautiful finish. So those are some of the things that you can do to have some beautiful finishes on your sweaters, and they look really amazing when you do that. So take the time. It takes much longer than just finishing, binding off, weaving in ends, but when you do those finishes, it really makes a huge difference. And then the next thing is good tension. Nothing beats good tension when you're knitting. So this skill is developed over time. When you're starting out, if you're a new knitter, your tension is not going to be great, but as you progress and as you grow as a knitter, your tension is going to get even better. So that's a long-term skill that you'll develop, but once you do that, your knitting looks so much better. And the other thing, when it comes to tension, it's important to note that tension is hard to get with certain yarns compared to others. Wool is very forgiving. When you block it, it evens out. but plant-based fibers are not so forgiving. So if you're still a newer knitter, you'll discover that when you knit with cotton, linen, or some silk, it's very difficult to get some very good finishes on your knitted garments or accessories. But if you're knitting with wool, like 100% wool, when you block your knitting, it evens out and looks much neater. So you need to find which yarns work very well for you in terms of getting the right tension. I think that will be very helpful. And have your go-to yarns so that when you want that stockinette garment that's going to look smooth and well finished, which yarn you're going to go for. That helps with the final look of your garment without any wonky stitches, and I think every knitter really needs that. So the next point is understand your yarn. So as a knitter, the interesting thing is that when you're knitting, whether it's a garment or an accessory, you are not just creating that sweater or that scarf or that shawl, but you're also creating the fabric simultaneously. So it's very important when you're knitting that you actually determine what kind of fabric you want at the end of the day. You want something that's drapey, you want something that's got high stitch definition, you want something that's soft and flowy and cloudy. So all those things are going to help you to determine which yarn you get to use for a particular project. So when you see designers coming up with certain things, and sometimes I've seen people asking, okay, why so much more here, and why is someone using this type of yarn instead of this? But it's because the vision that you have for that particular garment is in a certain way compared to what you'll get with a different fabric. So I'll just give you an example. Not so long ago, okay, that was maybe 3 years ago, I designed a sweater. Let me see my swatches here. I designed the mini pull over. I'll put up the photos, but let me show you the swatches first. So this is the swatch of a similar stitch pattern. So it's 2 strands of mohair held together. As you can see, the fabric is flowy and soft and very light. But look at this lace pattern that I knit here. This is 100% linen. So as you can see, this looks totally different. Great stitch definition, and the fabric is drapey, but it doesn't have this cloudy look. And then you have this one in a wool blend. This is also some lace. It's also DK weight. As you can see, it's got a bit of some fluffiness because there's some percentage of mohair, but it's not as flowy and as soft as this. These are 2 different fabrics. So I wanted a sweater that looked like this. There was no way I was going to get it with a wool blend or a linen, so it had to be this type of yarn. So when you're looking at what you want to knit, it's very important to determine the type of yarn that you want to use. I'll just show you a couple of examples here. This is a fingering weight swatch. It's knit on a fingering weight yarn, but this is some mohair and some silk mohair and lace weight yarn. So as you can see, this fabric is totally different. It's still fingering weight gauge wise, but it looks different. Sorry, it's all over the place and it's tearing off. But as you can see, these look different. And then I'll show you something else. These are knitted fabrics, just some plain textured stitches. You've got this. This is a cotton blend and it's a chunky weight yarn. Just look at it. It's got some good stitch definition, and yet you've got this. It's an iron weight, I think. The stitch definition is not so great, and this is kind of good, but the fabric is a bit heathered. So if you want something that will just show off your stitches, okay, let's assume these were all the same weight, you'd most likely go with this one. But if you want something that's a bit more fuzzy and doesn't really define the stitches, you could go with either one of these. So those are other ways of determining which yarns to go with. And then I'll show you something with stripes as well. So you've got this. It's stripes with some hand painted yarn, and then this is stripes with some commercially dyed yarn. So when you look at this, you'll notice that the stripes here are totally separate. They do not want to blend together. They totally stand out. But here, when you're looking at the striping, the stripes sort of like kind of want to blend together because the yarn is tonal and it's not exactly solid. It's much lighter in other places and darker, so you don't get a very clear definition. So when you're doing stripes as well, you need to determine, do I want some tonal yarn or do I want some very solid commercially dyed yarn to have that stitch definition? I'll put up 2 pullovers that I did, the Tandiwe and the what's the other one, Ndalwenhle. Yeah, so when you look at the two, the other one is knit with 2 strands of mohair held together, the navy blue and the cream one, and then you've got the white and gray. It's got very defined stripes. I was going for different looks with each, but you can see with the different fabric selection that the two have very different results. And lastly, I'll show some silk yarn. This is 100% silk. This is Kettle Silk by Pearl Soho, and it's made in Japan, and it's not shiny at all. So when it's knitted up, you get a fabric like this. It almost kind of like looks like paper, but it doesn't feel like paper. It's a very dry yarn, and it's firm and strong. It doesn't tear quite easily, but this is the fabric that you get. And then this is a silk blend. It's not 100% silk, but it's the shiny type of silk, and this is the type of fabric that you get. It's got some sheen. So if you are knitting with something that requires silk, or you want a silk garment, you have to decide whether you want this type of silk that's kind of dry and not shiny, or you want the shiny type of silk. So all these things sort of like come together when you're determining the type of yarn that you want to use. As I mentioned, you've got your linen. It's got this rope-like look, and it can be pressed. I pressed the swatch before I started this video, and it still looked great. The stitches are not affected. You also have something that's got some cashmere, and it's got this fluffy like kind of fabric. It's not your crispy fabric like this one. This one, I think it's a cotton blend. It's called Campo. It's also by Pearl Soho. And then you also have some hand painted yarns like this, and you also have solid yarns like this, and some brushed mohair that's quite on the chunky side. Let me show you how the knitted fabric looks. So this is how it looks when it's knitted up. It's very fluffy. The fabric is quite hairy because of the brushed mohair, and it's super warm. And then you've got some boucle yarn. I don't have my swatch with me. I couldn't find the swatch. I made with this one. So the most important thing is to play around with your yarn swatch. And the other important factor is that you need to be fully aware of all the local yarns that you have easy access to, so that when a pattern requires, okay, at this point, I now know if I want to do something with a 22 stitch gauge, most of these DK weight yarns would work so well for me. If I want a 24 stitch gauge, I know my fingering weight yarn, my trusty, this is locally produced, and this one is locally produced as well. And then if I want a 20 stitch gauge, I know that if I use African Expressions Harmony and 4.5 millimeter needles, I'll get my gauge. So it's all about being familiar with the yarn that's available to you. And if I want some heathered yarns, you can have some heathered yarns here. As you can see, this is different from this in terms of the look. So take some time to swatch. I know yarns are a bit expensive, but if you can just buy one skein or one ball, swatch it, see how it works, how it wraps. Make a big swatch if you can, you know, something like this, so you can really get the true feel of the fabric that you're creating. And as you can see, most of my swatches are quite huge. I make big swatches most of the time. Yeah, I make really big swatches so that I can get the feel of the fabric. So these are all big swatches, instead of the tiny ones like this. Because in this way, if you've got something this size, you can really feel the drape of the fabric. You feel how it, you can see how it looks, how crisp the stitches are. But with a tiny one, yeah, you can see stuff, but I think you get more true representation of the yarn with a much bigger swatch. So that's all I had to say about yarn and understanding yarn. The next point is find tutorials and sources of information that makes sense to you. So one thing I've noticed is that some patterns do have tutorials and some do not. But the thing is, when you buy a pattern, you are not buying instructions on how to knit, or you're not buying tutorials on learning how to do a cheap lap cast on, or how to do an Italian sewn bind off, or German short rolls, or anything like that. You're buying a pattern that's got instructions on how to make this garment and finish it and leave it looking like this. So the pattern is not going to teach you how to knit twisted stitches. It's not going to teach you how to cable, or how to knit lace, or how to knit top down. But when you look for tutorials, particularly on YouTube, I think it's the easiest way to learn. If you prefer video, you can go on YouTube and learn how to do certain techniques. So it's not upon the pattern designer to teach you how to knit certain techniques, unless if the designer comes up with some unique thing and it's not something that's very common, then it's important to have a tutorial for that. But with basic things like cast-ons and bind-offs and techniques of doing certain stitches, just look for the best tutorials or the best teacher on the internet that's got tutorials that you can actually understand. And for the longest time, I've been using BiggerthanlifeKnits. I think the tutorials there are amazing, high quality, and very straight to the point. So you can find the ones that work for you as an individual, so that when you see a pattern that requires certain skills, you don't have to worry about how to go about making that pattern. So the next point, okay, that was number 6. So number 7, understand your own body measurements in relation to standard measurements. So most of the times, we don't really think much about how different our bodies are from the standard sizes. And that works against us when we're knitting, because you look at a pattern and it says 40-inch bust, and you just knit it as it is and don't consider other factors that affect the way something will fit, regardless of the standard measurements that you find on the pattern. So I've said it on some previous videos. I'll link that video as well, which talks about which says knit, love, and wear everything that you make based on a certain number of skills that you need to develop as well. So when you're looking at sweaters, you always hear advice like, try on your favorite sweater and take those measurements, and that's the perfect advice that has worked for me as well. So what I do is that I go to shops and try on sweaters. So don't try the machine knitted ones that are made with those fine threads, but try those ones that are actually made with the same size of stitches that you would also make. Try different sizes, and then the one that suits you the most. So when you go into the shop, wear some jeans or some shoes, whatever you normally would wear with your sweaters, so that you get a true representation of what you want to knit. So you wear your jeans if you normally wear jeans or pants or dresses or skirts, whatever you want to wear with those sweaters. Or you can even try stuff in the shop that's similar to what you have. And then put on the sweater and see how it fits. So if you like the sleeve length, you like the drape, you like the fit, take that sweater and do your measurements. Okay, I don't know if it's I'm telling you something that may not be legal in your country, but I've measured my sweaters and I haven't gotten in trouble. So just measure your sweaters. You measure your bust circumference, of course. You measure the sleeve length. You measure the neck depth and how deep your neck goes on that one. Let's say you found the one that you really like. You measure your armhole depth. You measure the length from the underarm to the hem, and you take those measurements down for different styles. Try a raglan, a circular yoke, a drop shoulder, settle shoulder, whatever pattern, even sideways knitted. As long as you can find those sweaters in the shops, try them on, see what works for you and what really fits you best, and take those measurements, so that when you're going to knit your own sweaters at home, you already have your own schematics. That, okay, if I'm knitting a raglan, so once I start working on the sleeves, I want them to be 18 inches long. Maybe you'll discover that with circular yokes, actually the best sleeve length for you is 17 inches or 19. So just do that. Try on for some already finished and made sweaters. And the other important thing when you're trying on the sweaters is to understand the issue of ease. Ease works in different ways for different bodies. So a pattern might recommend 10 inches of ease, but I can assure you someone, let's say you take 10 people with a 40-inch bust and you give them a sweater that's 50 inches because the pattern recommends 10 inches of ease. What you'll notice is that it will fit them differently because of the way their bodies are shaped. Some people will have narrower shoulders and a larger bust. Some people have a broader shoulders than the bust, but the bust is still 40 inches. Someone will have a larger tummy or someone will have a flatter tummy. So the way the garment hangs and their height and the way they carry their bodies is going to be totally different. You can have those 10 people wearing the sweater and looking totally different, and it will work for some and not work for others. Someone will look better with 5 inches of ease. Someone will look better with even more ease, particularly maybe if they are taller and slimmer. They'll still look much better with more ease, but different body shapes do not necessarily need the same ease. So as a knitter, you'll discover that if you try on different sweaters and figure out the best ease for you, you'll be able to tell that if it's a drop shoulder, you need this much ease. If it's a circular yoke, maybe you need less ease than a drop shoulder. And if it's raglan, maybe you need to fit exactly as your body. And if it's a satin sleeve, you need a different fit altogether. So all these factors make a huge difference in the ease that you'll end up choosing for different sweaters. The recommended ease in the pattern is recommended for a purpose. It's not a law, it's not a requirement, but it all depends on what works best for you. So you can work with less ease or more ease depending on what your body shape requires. So that's point number 7. And number 8, understand the important areas where a sweater is supposed to fit depending on the construction that you're working with. And this is very important with different styles. For instance, I've noticed that for me, with a circular yoke, I don't worry too much about the bust, but I worry more about the circumference all around the shoulders, because you'll notice sometimes that something may fit on the bust but be too tight here, and when you move your arm it forms a groove. So it's important that when you're doing a circular yoke sweater, you look at the stitch count for this section and then decide the number of stitches or the size that you want to be working with at this point on the widest part of your body, where this on the widest part of the circular yoke. So it's very important to determine that size. Let's say you're working on a satin sleeve. The bust circumference is not as important when you're starting on your sweater as the fit on the shoulders. So from shoulder to shoulder, it's very important that the sweater sits right there and the sleeve starts exactly at this point, not lower like a drop shoulder. So all those things really factor in and they are very important. So when you're starting a new project, you need to understand which area, which fit area is the most important at this starting point and how can I adjust. For instance, if it's a satin sleeve, you'll need to get it to fit perfectly here. Let's say for me, I've got narrower, my shoulders are narrower than my bust. So I can start with a smaller size, and when you do the increases, you actually do more increases and move towards the next size that would fit the bust than to work with the size that fits the bust but is too big on the shoulders, and you end up having a dropped satin sleeve, which is really weird. So those are other factors that you need to consider. And then number 9, learn to be patient. So this is a hard one for us as knitters because knitting a garment or even a shawl takes a lot, and it's a lot of time commitment that you need to put in. And I've noticed that when we get to certain points, maybe you're getting closer to the hem of the top or you're getting to the sleeves, we sometimes end up binding off before we actually showed. I've seen a lot of knitters, and I've done this myself, where you end up, when you're wearing something, you're busy trying to pull it down, and even if it's sleeves, you see someone trying it on, taking photos or whatever, and they're busy trying to pull it down because you didn't knit to the proper length. So what I do nowadays, since I've been trying to work on my patience, is when I knit and I'm trying on the sleeves, I know it's going to stretch a bit, but I try to do different positions, raise my hand when I'm trying on, move in certain ways so I can see how much it pulls and moves, so that when the sleeve is done and I've done the length that I actually need, I don't have to worry about raising my hand and the sleeve goes down. Or maybe you move your arms up a little bit and your midriff is showing because your sweater is very short. So I've learned to be patient And I think it's a skill that we all need to learn. It's not technically a knitting skill, but it is a skill that you need to learn if you're going to be knitting your own garments, and you need to take some time to actually get them to the right size that you need. In that way, you'll get more wear out of them. I've noticed the ones that I actually took the time to get them to the perfect size get more wear than the ones where I just did shortcuts. And that's still a lot of time commitment, because that could be maybe 2 to 3 hours less than the one that I did properly, and I still don't get to wait, and I'll have wasted 30 something or 40 hours for nothing. And then the last one, have a sense of adventure and be ready to explore and try out new skills. There's this common thing that happens among knitters, which is kind of weird sometimes. You hear people saying they don't like to purl, they don't like to weave in ends, they don't like to swatch, they don't like to knit cables, they don't want to knit lace, they don't want to stick. So by the time someone is done talking about what they don't want to do, you realize, okay, this person really doesn't want to knit. And it's very important to try out different skills so that you can get the results that you actually want. If you have to knit a sweater sideways, flat, seam it up, do it. If you want that look, if you want that finished project, do it. You're gonna love it at the end of the day. I recently did a sideways pull over that had a patch pocket. It was a lot of work and a lot of little details, but I love it, and I've worn it quite a lot in the winter. And as we were moving towards spring, it was the perfect fingering weight garment, and I enjoyed it. So take the time to try out different skills. Stick something, do intarsia. Just try out new skills. You'll be surprised at how much you might love it. But if you don't try, you'll never know. So I've been trying out new techniques. I did my first intarsia pull over. It was a very simple one, like the most basic intarsia, but I really loved it. So explore different techniques and get to learn different skills. And in that way, you'll expand your knitting abilities and the knowledge that you have. And as you grow, the projects that you actually knit are going to be pieces that you're so proud of. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you really enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I'll be posting more videos, podcasts, knitting tips, and tutorials in the near future. Thank you so much for joining me.